Hello and welcome to the course Basics of Experimental Design for Cognitive Psychology. I am Arak Verma from the Department of Cognitive Science at IIT Kanpur. This is week 2 where we are discussing different types of research designs, and so far in this week I have been talking about descriptive research designs and some of the nuances related to them. And this lecture also I will continue our discussion on different kinds of research design and what are the different factors that are associated with them. Now, one of the most used types of descriptive research has been the survey research. I am sure you must have come across several surveys in your lifetime around you, and we are constantly filling several surveys anyway. So, for example, if you go to a mall, there is somebody with a list of questions that they want to ask. Every now and then there are customer surveys that we fill. Other times there are, say for example, student reaction surveys, teacher surveys, and so on. So, we are basically it's something that we are very familiar with, but what is it and how can we use it as a research method is what I am going to talk about. Now, a survey typically is a series of self-report measure administered either through an interview or a written questionnaire. So, sometimes you will get a call from somebody saying I am calling from so and so bank, or I am calling from so and so company, we wanted to know your views about question A to A, B, C, D and so on. So, either you are sort of giving this on a phone call, or you are filling a questionnaire, maybe sometimes on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you like our service, on a scale of 1 to 5, how satisfied are you with the executives behavior, this and that. So, we are sort of very aware with how surveys work, and that is basically testimony to the fact that surveys have actually been the most widely used methods of collecting descriptive information about a group of people, a sample or a general population. For instance, telephonic surveys or small interview at a shopping mall, or they sometimes hand out these small pamphlets with 10 or 5 questions, and you fill them, you get a scratch card and you hope that you will win something at the end of it. What are these used for? What are these survey people trying to do? Typically, or the idea behind this method is to produce a snapshot of the opinions, attitudes or behaviors of a group of people at a given time. All right, it could be consumers. For example, I am launching a new product, let us say a washing detergent, and I am standing at the aisle of a particular departmental store which has different kinds of detergents. I can just ask people questions about, okay, what is the most important quality of a detergent? Is it its smell, color, amount of bleach therein, should have chemicals, should not have chemicals, should be economic, should be machine friendly. So, I can come up with 5-6 different questions, and also things like which detergent are you using at this point. So, I get some data about what is the current market share of different competitors, what are people looking for, and see how I can intervene, create a brand and create a unique sort of strength for my brand. So, this is one. The other is, say for example, a lot of times we are filling surveys for customer service executives. Okay, so you go and you take a service. Let us say you send your car for servicing, and they will send you a questionnaire saying how much did you like the behavior of our executives, was the car serviced on time, are you happy with it, are you happy with how our executives talk to you, any number of things. What these questions basically do is they create a snapshot, they create a distribution of a certain variable in the population. How many people use a blue colored detergent? How many people would prefer a cheaper versus a more expensive detergent? How many people pay more importance to executive behavior as compared to how well the car was serviced? Things like this. Now, another type of survey instrument is basically interviews. So, a lot of times surveys are administered in form of interviews, wherein an individual, that is the respondent, is presented with some questions either in person or over telephone. Now, an advantage of in-person interviews is that they allow the researchers to develop a close rapport and sense of trust with the respondent, and then basically a lot of information can come out, a lot of information can be elicited, and the person is more relaxed, and let us say seamless sharing of information is happening. You might be aware that there are so many podcasts that are happening these days. People are very popular by making podcasts. What they do is, the format is rather open ended, isn't it? There is a person sitting on the left, sitting on the right, they start with a brief introduction, but then they sort of go ahead with sharing, asking questions, sharing answers, and in that sense it gives you a very interesting insight into the kind of questions you wanted to ask with that person, be it a politician, a Bollywood personality, a cricketer, or sometimes just common people. All right. So this rapport that is built, and something that you'll see in most of these interviews, they typically start with a very informal introduction. They typically start with something that will break the ice, something that will endear the respondent and the interviewer with each other. And the idea is that once that ice is broken, and that is why you'll see in a lot of cases, before the interview goes online, before the interview is getting recorded, the interviewer and the respondent have met and interacted. They have been briefed about each other's likes and dislikes. The interviewer tells, okay, broadly these are the questions I will tell you. The respondent says, okay, you can ask me anything, but please do not ask me X, Y, and Z, so that there is a level of comfort within those degrees of freedom. The interview sort of operates, and in that sense, to that level, it seems like a very interesting experiment. Okay, they say it leads to more honest and open responding. So that is also something that is an advantage of taking in-person interviews and building rapports between the respondent and the interviewer. Also, face-to-face interviews are actually expensive to conduct, isn't it? You will have to go travel to a certain place, find a place to record, find a nice place to sit, maybe in a restaurant which is rather noisy, so you probably rent a studio and this and that. So in-person interviews, if you want to do it at scale, are rather expensive to set up. You can go to different people's houses, but typically people are not very comfortable getting a stranger in their house for whatever interview that you want to take. So for that reason, you will see that for most purposes, so for example, credit card, bank home loans, or other kinds of things, telephonic surveys are much more common than face-to-face interviews, at least in the market, in the scale. Telephonic surveys are therefore, and as you can see, they are more economical, they are efficient, and several interviewers can be located in the same place, and the interview can be conducted in a coordinated manner. So for example, if you are a sales or a survey company, you can employ 20 people to make let's say 500 calls each day. So these people will make use of the telephone data. They'll call 500 people, and they'll basically be able to collect information at a much larger scale. All right. So in that sense, while telephonic interviews, while in-person interviews have their own advantage, telephonic interviews are typically chosen for their ultra efficiency and for being less expensive. Also, the format of the interview is something that we can talk about. We've talked something similar about this, I think, in the last week, one of the lectures, but let's do this in a little bit more detail. So we know there are two kinds of interviews, structured and unstructured. So in an unstructured interview, what happens is that the interviewer typically can talk freely with the respondent about a range of topics. So I'm sure if you're watching podcasts and if you're watching interviews these days on YouTube and some of these other channels, you will see that a lot of interviews these days, I'm sort of I remember watching Nilesh Mishra's slow interviews with a lot of famous personalities, and those interviews are very open-ended. They are sort of self-paced and about a range of topics. There is no structure, there is no clear path. There might be a broad path, point A, point B, point C, but the exact steps you take in going from point A to point B is not extremely restricted. Okay. So in unstructured interviews, what you will see is that the interviewer is talking freely with the respondent, and he can talk about a range of topics. Yes. While the interviewer may have a broad range of, so this is what I was saying, that while the interviewer may have a broad range of pre-decided topics, during the interview, the researcher, that researcher may focus on only those topics that the respondent is most interested in talking about. Say for example, you can have a list of 20 items in your head, but when you start talking to people, let's say when you are interviewing people who have survived a calamity, maybe an earthquake, maybe a flood, all right, you have any number of things in mind, but when you go, the person is so aggrieved, they are sort of telling you about their struggles to get food, their houses might have been destroyed, there might have been deaths in the family. So what typically would happen is you will not push your list. You will basically ask a question and let the person respond, and let the person take whatever trajectory he or she wants to take. When the time is right, then you pose the next question, and that question can be typically following up from what the person has just said. Okay. So it's broadly, it's a good idea to have a list of things that you want to cover in an interview. But in unstructured interviews, it is very important that people let the respondents talk, and the interview and the direction of the interview is typically shaped by what the respondents want to talk about. So there can be there is no sequence here, there is no requirement of linearity here, and there is nothing like, okay, I have to cover this entire syllabus. Also, as the questions addressed in the interview may differ across different respondents, the interviewers are typically trained to ask questions in a way that would elicit most of the information that is typically you're seeking for, you're requiring from the respondents. So this is also something we don't talk about a lot. Interviewers need to be trained to conduct the interview. They need to be trained how to conduct a unstructured interview versus how to conduct a structured interview. All right. So interviewers may need to be trained to be sensitive to what the respondent is saying. A lot of times you will see in TV interviews, the respondent is saying something else, and the interviewer is sort of stuck on his own or her own trajectory, and it sometimes causes a discord between the two, and it's very apparent. As a classical data collection method, it does not work that way. So sometimes these face-to-face unstructured interviews can be held in such a manner that this is basically being done with a group of people at once. Okay, so the interviewer is there, the interviewer is asking question, but there is not a single respondent, but there are a group of respondents. So what happens in this case is that the respondents are obviously responding to the interviewer, but at the same time the respondents are talking to each other as well, and a particular bit of knowledge about that topic is emerging. A very common example that emerges in my head is that of round tables. So you might have seen that a lot of round tables and panel discussions, etc., are conducted, very common these days on the news and on social media and so on. And what happens is there that the question is posed. The interviewer typically poses the question and moderates its direction, but the group of people that are there, let's say if all Bollywood artists are there, or if all cricketers are there, or if all politicians are there, they will basically give their own answers. Sometimes their answers will encroach into the answers of others, sometimes they are responding to each other, but a certain degree of knowledge is emerging. All right, and that is basically what is called a focus group. If you do it more formally, sometimes it is done informally. And again, when I'm giving examples from social media, news channels and so on, please don't consider them as typical academic examples. I'm basically trying to give you more handy examples so that you can understand the overall paradigm. Now, so unstructured interviews can actually provide in-depth information about the specific concerns of an individual or a group of people, and therefore can also produce ideas for future research projects or policy decisions. For example, let us say a bunch of academicians are having a discussion about how to sort of invigorate the interest of students in a given subject, or how to ensure that all students are attending the classes, what kind of policies be formed that all students are interested, attending classes, working very hard, and this and that. Now, what would typically happen is that there will be academicians, there will be administrators, there will also be maybe some student representatives, and if if a good interviewer is basically bringing out the most relevant questions and then moderating the questions so that everybody gets a representation in the overall answer, the emergent answer, then obviously these kinds of panel discussions, these kinds of group discussions can actually lead to very interesting insights about future projects, what is the next thing we can do, or say for example even making policy decisions, because different stakeholders are all at the same place at the same time, and they are engaging with the same important questions. So that is in some sense the power of these unstructured interviews, both group wise and individual wise. Now, the interesting part or slightly problematic part about unstructured interviews is that it is difficult task to train interviewers to ask questions in an unbiased manner. So, a lot of times you will see that when people are taking interviews, their personal inclinations and their personal biases start factoring in. Suppose I am talking to you about a particular issue and I have person A in the opposition and person B in favor of that particular topic, and I as a person am in opposition of that topic. Now, what happens is you will see it happening a lot of time that the interviewer, because he or she has a personal bias, will ask certain kinds of questions to the opposing party and certain kinds of questions to the favoring party, and in that sense what happens is that the interview does not remain neutral anymore, the interview does not remain unbiased anymore, and whatever the result of that kind of interview would be, it will always be or more likely be lopsided than a neutral result coming out of a honest discussion among the stakeholders. So that is again something I am sure you have seen several times across social media, YouTube, this and that, but it is extremely important when we are talking about this in terms of a academic interview. If you want to study, let us say, the effect of people getting displaced, migrations, European migrations or migrations within our country because of, let us say, lack of labor, lack of this, that and so on, and if you want to evolve some important actionable information out of it, it is very important that the issue be dealt with academically without biases, and whatever stakeholders are there, everybody gets their fair share of representation, which will illuminate the topic, which will illuminate and create possibilities for making policy decisions. Now let us talk about structured interviews. We basically were discussing that okay, unstructured interviews are good and this and that, but there is this non-linearity about unstructured interviews that we were talking about. There is this problem that not everybody has method to be completely unbiased and neutral and conduct the interview. So some of these things are handled better when the interview is very structured, when you know exactly questions 1 to 10 have to be asked, and they have to be asked in exactly the same order. Okay. So in order to elicit and organize the data in a more systematic manner, researchers often utilize what is called the structured interview format. Here the questions are prepared ahead of time, and the interviewer reads the question to the respondent one by one in exactly the same sequence. This obviously, as I said, has the advantage that it allows for better comparison of responses across participants. It allows you to get all the knowledge that you wanted, because you have basically asked all of the questions that you wanted to ask. Also the response formats are controlled, isn't it? Also, say for example, the time frame, the sequence, the kind of response that is coming, the time that you are giving to each question, all of this gets standardized across participants. So if you want to collate the data from 20 interviews or from 50 interviews, you have a better chance of being able to do it in the structured interview format, because everything is done in a comparable and systematic manner. So this is one of the major advantages of the structured interview format. Now but interviews are not that common, they are at least less common as compared to questionnaires. The most common thing that we come across is questionnaires, fixed format, self-report items, but questions, printed questions in nowadays printed basically means digitally written and so on also. So you get a PDF, you get a Google form that you have to sign in, choose 1, choose 2, choose 3 and so on. So printed does not really mean, but printed basically means digital or paper based set of questions that one has to ask. Okay. So questionnaires include a set of fixed format self-report items that is completed by the respondents at their own pace. So you send the questionnaires. A lot of times what you will see is people receive questionnaires in their emails. Our students, psychology students, do send to a lot of people questionnaires which are relevant to their research in a Google link, and they expect that the people will respond to it. They are given a broad timeline that please send the responses to me by 2 weeks or 1 week, or if it is urgent by the end of the day, something like that. And it is interestingly, because this is done without supervision. So you send the link of the questionnaire to somebody, and you then wait that in a day, in 2 days, in 5 days the responses will come back. So no supervision here. This is probably the most economical way of conducting interviews or asking questions to people, because now what you can do is you can add in your mailing list 5,000 people and send the same email with the link of the, let us say, Google questionnaire to everybody. Okay. There are also some interesting characteristics of these questionnaires. For example, it is possible, or it could be possible, that questionnaires will produce more honest responses than interviews, because particularly, say for example, if the questions are about sensitive issues, let us say intimate details, financial details, personal details and so on, then the presence of an interviewer sometimes acts as an inhibiting factor. But if it is a questionnaire and you have for the most part taken your attempt to anonymize it, then it is likely that you will get the best and most honest answers. There is no guarantee, but at least the hope is that. Okay. Also, questionnaires are less likely to be influenced by the characteristics of the interviewer, because they are standard. Which voice modulation I am using to ask this question does not get manifested in the questionnaire. Okay. Which party or position I support does not get mixed up with my interview, but it is in the same standard digital sterile format, reaching the people anyways, and they are answering the question like they would want to. So, and there is an example, for example, if the topic of your questionnaire concerns race related attitudes, it has been shown that the respondents' answer do vary, are affected by the race of the interviewer. Okay. So, it could be anything, race, so social categories, it is race in rest of the world, it could be religion, it could be caste, it could be socioeconomic status, it could be a simple thing like teacher and student. So, if a teacher is asking a student about what they feel about their teachers, obviously that is going to impact. When a student is asking another student, oh, what do you feel about your teachers, the answer might be completely different. All right. So, this is again something that is handled or sort of skipped around by questionnaires. There is an interesting thing, by the way, a property of questionnaires which is noteworthy, is that people do not really respond to questionnaires all the time. The response rates are typically lower. I remember you send out 200 questionnaires to 200 people, let us say one questionnaire to 200 people, and the number of people that will actually fill it would probably be less than 100, sometimes 20, 30 only. Among those 20, 30, 40 people who have filled your questionnaire, how many people have answered all the questions correctly, and correctly, there is no correct incorrect here, but how many of them have answered the questions in all their honesty and been upfront with this, will probably be an even smaller percentage. So, this is a bit of a problem with questionnaires and unsupervised question answering, because it may lead to incorrect conclusions, as the people who return the questionnaire may have responded differently than those who did not return the questionnaire. Also, investigators can sometimes, as investigators we try to do this, we try to increase the response rates by providing gifts or monetary compensations for completing the questionnaires. Sometimes we have class credits, sometimes we have monetary compensations, sometimes we sort of appeal in an emotional way, this and that. Or say for example, we can sort of work with the style of the questionnaire. We do not want a very long questionnaire, we make a short questionnaire, clear statements, not a lot of choices, 3-4 choices and so on. So, in that sense, how are the people responding to these questionnaires is an important question which we are all talking about. Also, in questionnaires, you are never sure that the participant is taking the questions one by one, or is doing 1 and doing 21 and doing 15 and doing 27, that the order in which the questions have been answered is something that you cannot really ensure. And in some cases, it might have an effect on how you interpret and analyze the data, or how you interpret the answer. Say for example, if the last question is answered first versus the first question, there might be properties of those questions that will basically have a cascading effect to rest of the questionnaire, and in that sense the entire questionnaire gets corrupted. So, the data becomes not usable, and you are left with nothing but to sort of discard that data, because it is not useful anymore for your analysis. Now, so this is the types of instruments and the type of questionnaires we were talking about, but there are other interesting things that we can do as well. So, how do we make our surveys and questionnaires and interviews more effective? Okay. So, let's look at some of these ideas. So, Mitchell and Jolly in their book Research Design Explained offer us some suggestions, and I am taking them up because I sort of also want to highlight how to do this. So, survey research may run into problems because the researchers were not really clear. So, one of the major problems that comes in survey research is if the researchers themselves are not really clear about what is it they are seeking from the results. What do they want to find out? How do they want to find out? Do they have a hypothesis? Do they have their key research questions already outlined and clearly stated? If that is not the case, the items that you have made will sort of be all over the place. The responses that you will get, you will not find a way to systematically organize them, and in that sense what will happen is you will not really get your research per se will not be that successful. Okay. Also, they say that survey research may be flawed because sometimes the questionnaires or tests have what is called poor construct validity. Okay. What is construct validity? This can basically happen, say for example, when the questions seek knowledge that the respondents do not possess. Sometimes in all our wisdom we make very interesting questions, but we do not take into account the target population. If you are asking about something to an individual, it should be something that that individual can answer. If you are asking, say for example, class 10 questions to a class 1 person, how class 1 student, this will not really work. Okay. Also, sometimes you frame the questions wrongly. You frame the questions in a way that they hint at the answers that the researcher anyways wants. So, what people will do is they will basically say, oh, this is what you want to hear, tick mark, and I am done. Also, sometimes the questions are not clear to the respondents. So, for example, sometimes people use very flowery language, very complex language, and the respondents may misinterpret the questions, and they will give you the answers from that vantage point of the misinterpretation, and in that sense that item becomes useless for you. Also, sometimes it is possible that the researcher misinterprets or misquotes the respondent's answer, and it may lead to completely different conclusions than the one you intended with. Also, survey research will have little external validity because the people who are questioned may not represent the target population. If you have not sampled nicely, if your sample does not represent the target population, then there is no external validity. Say for example, if a telephonic survey in Uttar Pradesh is basically conducted on the issue of petrol prices, it will not elicit the representative responses if the responses are only sought from a section of population, maybe extremely rich people for whom it does not matter, or extremely poor people who do not own vehicles. Okay. So, if you ask questions from people who do not fall in your target population, who do not represent your target population, then whatever the results of the survey that you are going to get is going to be faulty and it is not going to work. Now, to avoid falling prey to these mistakes, we can perform simple checks. We can maximize the overall efficacy of our survey instruments. Let us see. First and the foremost and the most important thing is, what is the hypothesis? What is the research question that you want to go ahead with? What are the hypotheses in terms of this research question that you have framed, and in that sense, are your items in the questionnaire related to these hypotheses or not? So, this loop is the first starting point of creating any of these surveys. So, researchers must, and that is basically what the second point is, are the questions included in the survey related to the hypothesis. Okay. So, I basically talked about both of them at once, that researchers must take care to ensure that the questions must be focused towards testing the hypothesis, else the generated data will be rendered useless. Okay. So, these are the first two and the most important things when you are designing the survey. Also, if the questions are not in sync with the research questions and the hypothesis, and participants will respond inconsistently, then you will get a mountain of data which will be useless. You will not be able to systematically analyze or interpret them at all. Now, what kind of cause effect relation you want to build? So, for the successful outcome of the survey research, researchers must have a descriptive hypothesis. For example, you cannot have a cause effect, because cause effect is handled best in experiments, not here. So, the hypothesis that people should have here should be descriptive hypothesis about, say for example, a group's characteristics, how many people like wearing a blue shirt, how many people like buying a green detergent, how many people are comfortable with the petrol prices, those kinds of things. Okay. And they have basically described that there are 4 types of hypotheses that people can have. Say for example, snapshot type hypothesis. So, sometimes researchers conducting a survey must be interested in knowing that how many people in a given population possess a certain characteristic or support a certain opinion position. For example, a social worker might want to know through a survey that how many adolescents in that community have been exposed to drugs. So, just yes no answer, you get a description that okay, in this particular neighborhood among the age group so to so, this percent of people have already been exposed to drugs or alcohol abuse. Profiling hypothesis. For example, sometimes researchers typically conduct a survey to develop a detailed profile of certain groups. So, you want to know about various characteristics of these groups. Say for example, Diener and Siegelman Diener and Seligman found that that very happy college students were more outgoing than others. So you want to say profile outgoing students, college students, you can say, okay, what are your activities, what are your play times, this, that, and on the basis of that you can get a detailed knowledge about different characteristics that they have. Relational hypothesis, for example, sometimes you can ask questions about how the two or more variables are related to each other. For example, Davis and colleagues used a survey to test the hypothesis that attachment styles, you might be aware of secure or insecure attachment styles, are related to sex drive and reasons for having or not having sex. So again, you can basically ask have a questionnaire which asks question about one side and the other side, and eventually you can perform correlations and so on, which will help you to get this idea. Hasselton and colleagues, they use surveys to test the hypothesis that how upset people will be if their partners lie to them. Now interestingly, they basically wanted to check that they said they had this hypothesis that it will be related to both the type of lie and the gender of a person. They predicted something very interesting. They said women would be more upset by men lying about their income, and men will be more upset by women lying about their past. Okay. So again, something they collected data, I do not know what they found, but questions that you can ask. Finally, Oishi and colleagues use surveys to test the hypothesis that beyond a certain level, happiness is not associated with financial and educational success. So again, you can basically ask questions about financial and educational success and ask questions about how happy do you feel, and then you can basically have a broad description through plots and so on, that how are these things related or unrelated to each other. Finally, you can also have predictive hypothesis. For example, sometimes the surveys might be conducted with an intention to predict how people will behave in different situations. For example, a lot of times news organizations perform surveys to predict how people will vote in a certain election. Market researchers conduct surveys to find out which products are more likely to sell quickly and which will receive a lukewarm response. Now remember this, that while surveys may be an excellent tool to create a descriptive snapshot, cause effect, correlational hypothesis, the surveys are not best suited for them. They can give you the initial data, but the rest of the thing has to be done through other methods that we will talk about in the next lecture. Now there can also be questions about, okay, when we are using this self-report method, how useful this self-report method is. Will it lead us to correct knowledge? Okay. So Nisbet and Wilson conducted some research, and they basically provide us some pointers about why in a lot of these surveys people's self-report might be completely inaccurate. Let us see. Participants never knew and will never know the answer to the questions posed. If you ask a extremely abstract metaphysical kind of question, for example, sometimes people are in by themselves stranger to their own feelings. If you ask them, oh, why do you like broccoli, or why do you like carrot, or why do you not like broccoli, some people do not like mangoes for example, why do you not like a mango, they will not be able to come up with a clear answer, or at least at best an estimate of that. So the question should be posed in such a manner that they can elicit exact responses and not estimations, because a lot of things people do not even know about themselves. Also sometimes, see, memory is prone to error, memory is something that fades over time. So it is possible that people's responses are inaccurate because they do not any longer remember the information needed to answer the question. For instance, this is interesting, obese people tend to underreport what they have eaten. Students tend to over-report how much effort they have put in their studies. So again, sometimes it is a matter of time and people forget, or people are sort of trying to hide in whatever manner. Also something that sometimes it happens that participants do not even know the correct answer of a question at that point. Say for example, if you ask questions in the format what if, what would you do if you were in this situation? No, the person has not been in that situation and they are not extremely good at predicting future. So these kind of questions, there is an example here that when people were asked what would they do if they were put in milligrams experiment, most of them said they would basically not obey, but actually 60 to 80% of them ended up confirming and obeying the commands. So again, very interesting. Also sometimes what happens is that the participants are not giving the correct answer knowingly because they are affected by certain biases. For example, the social desirability bias. Participants basically want to appear good, they want to appear likable and sociable and so on. So, they would sometimes understate unpleasant things, exaggerate pleasant things, and they would likely most likely give an answer that makes them feel good. Okay. For instance, if one were to believe the US adults survey responses, 40% of the US adults regularly attended religious services in the early 90s. So, this is when the survey was done, this is what everybody said. When this was matched with actual attendance data in religious gatherings or religious services, basically going to the church on Sunday and other prayer ceremonies, it was actually found that it was not as high as the people had reported. It was actually less than half of the reported data. So, social desirability. Okay, how punctual are you? How disciplined are you? Everybody will give answers that will present them as very punctual and very hardworking and so and so, but actuality might be something else. Abiding by demand characteristics. People are extremely smart, they know what you want to hear from that survey, and a lot of times what happens is people will give you the answers that you are looking for. So, that is why a very impartial framing of the questions and sort of a non-person way of delivering questions might be useful. For example, based on the perceived political alignment of a journalist, voters will indicate that, oh, this party is good or that party is good. Okay. Also, fixed response tendency. Sometimes people are just lazy. They choose that, okay, I will give this and this answer, and whatever question you ask them, they will basically present a very similar answer, displaying a fixed response tendency. They want to answer 1, 2, 3, 4, or let us say they want to answer 4, 4, 4, 4. So, whatever the question is, they are not even reading the question, they are just answering 4, 4, 4, 4, collecting all the answers that are with 4. So, this is again something which minimizes the efficacy of all of this. Okay. Now, we have seen the strength of these methods, we have seen some of the loopholes, some of the pitfalls of this research, but say for example, do we do this or not? Certainly we do it, and a lot of people are doing survey research, and these kind of descriptive tools are being adopted and used extensively. But one last thing that is very important is that who are you collecting this data for? Who are these results relevant for? Are they relevant for policy decisions? Are they relevant for basic research? Are they relevant for some kind of change that you want to bring up? That is important. So, a most important consideration here is to keep in mind that the target population and the generalizability of the sample. If your question is about policy decisions, then the people giving the survey should be the ones that the policy is going to impact most. All right. If the survey is about some medical things, then the medical stakeholders should be the ones who should be answering these questions. So, this is something that I am sure people should keep in mind when they are using and designing these instruments. I think that is all for today. I will see you in the next lecture. Thank you.